Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Before we begin today, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for all the kind words and messages over the past few weeks, with Mum in hospital having suffered a stroke. It really does mean a lot and I really do appreciate it. But again, just a big thank you. I absolutely love each and every one of you and this community. However, with that said, on to today. And today we're discussing 5 pivotal moments that almost changed the Imperium forever. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. So you have been warned, and with that said, let's just jump straight in. So the galaxy is defined as anything by the events that shape it. The Imperium as we know it has had its destiny and trajectory changed by one defining event after the other. The most obvious, of course, was the fall of Horus, which led to the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne. Since then, despite the Imperium regressing into dogma, paranoia and persecution, the grimdark as we all know it, it has only clung on to survival thanks to victory in monumental events. The War of the Beast, the Tyrannic Wars, the Indomitus Crusade, and so on and so on. However, it's equally survived, being shaped and moulded by the events that didn't happen. And today I wanted to discuss 5 pivotal moments that almost changed the Imperium forever. Moments that by luck, coincidence, a single action or by the chance of time could have easily changed the Imperium we see today. And of course there could be a million of these kind of examples, but today I'm sticking to recent events within the lore, current Imperium, not heresy era, and moments that in particular stand out for me. So without further ado, the first moment that very nearly changed the Imperium forever: Roboute Guilliman's capture by Chaos. For all the amazing events that have happened since Guilliman's return as Lord Commander, the reality of it is he was extremely lucky to even reach Terra in the first place, for the forces of Chaos had him exactly where they wanted him. After becoming reborn upon Macragge, launching a campaign to re-cleanse the world, Guilliman then commenced his grand Terran crusade, his attempt to reach the throne world and reunite with his father, to see if the Emperor even still lived. And as epic quests and journeys go, this was about as event-filled as you're going to get, with Guilliman's forces traversing the warp storms and plunging from one calamitous event to the other. It was his capture by the greater demon, Kairos Fateweaver, that truly had Guilliman on the threshold of defeat. Lost within the Great Maelstrom, Guilliman's forces were ambushed by a combined force of Red Corsairs and Tzeentch demons, led by the greater demon Kairos Fateweaver. Here, trapped within a vast ship graveyard, the Chaos forces boarded the stuck Macragg's honour, where the Fateweaver entrapped Guilliman with psychic chains, forcing the Imperial surrender. So here, enchained by the forces of Chaos, at the mercy of Kairos Fateweaver and thus the Chaos god Tzeentch, Guilliman had literally been defeated before he'd even truly begun, before he'd been able to return to Terra, before he'd assumed rulership of the Imperium, unveiled the Primaris, and launched the Indomitus Crusade. Guilliman was here, a prisoner. In one fell stroke, Tzeentch could have won the war. Guilliman could have been removed, and the great Imperial fight back would have never transpired. The Imperium would have been ground into defeat, and Abaddon would have had a clear course for terror. It's crazy to think about it, really. Guilliman was literally chained up as a prisoner aboard a Blackstone fortress, and at the complete mercy of chaos. How easily fate can be altered by one being's actions. Because, as we know, Guilliman would indeed not fall here. Kairos Fateweaver would refuse to kill the Primarch, the minions of Tzeentch and their schemes, as ever at times their own worst enemy. Skarbrand, infuriated at the Fateweaver's decision not to kill the Primarch, would take matters into his own hands and invade the Blackstone Fortress. This internal war by the forces of chaos, enabling Cypher of all people to free Guilliman from his cell. The Imperium lives thanks to the Fateweaver's scheming, and equally the actions of the mysterious fallen angel. Things could have been very, very different had the Fateweaver just ended Guilliman when he had the chance. Moving on, next we have Dante attempting to nuke the Silent King. Long before we had the big return of Sarek to the tabletop, we had an absolutely fascinating appearance of him, or possible appearance of him, within the short story Word of the Silent King. Here upon the world of Gienna, the Blood Angels were engaged in a campaign against the Necrons, until the arrival of a Tyranid Hive fleet radically changed the situation, turning it from a tough one to disastrous. And as Dante and his command council convened at their headquarters for the next move, their systems were completely overridden by the Necrons, demanding Dante's attendance to meet with the Silent King himself. Now this was an opportunity too good to turn down, not only to see if it was indeed the fabled and mysterious Silent King, but to eliminate him if it was. And so not only did Dante go to this meeting, he went aboard a Rhino containing an Exterminatus grade bomb within it. Dante was prepared to sacrifice himself to take out the supreme ruler of the Necron Empire. In simple terms, he was going to nuke the Silent King. How radically could that have changed the Imperium and the galaxy as we know it? For the Imperium, Dante would have been gone, the Lord of Angels, the man who brought together the chapters of the Blood to defeat Leviathan. No Dante, no victory at Baal. By the time Guilliman arrived at Baal with his Indomitus crusade, the Blood Angels' homeworld would have been long destroyed. He's the man who brought the lion to the Dark Angels. No Dante to do that. Azrael and co are most likely dead at the hands of Angron, the Dark Angels chapter, and many of the Unforgiven, all but annihilated. Not to mention Dante's appointment as Warden of Imperium Nihilus would have never taken place. You lose Dante, there is a lot that it in turn affects. However, would his sacrifice have been worth it? With no Silent King, it's arguable the Necrons will never truly become a unified force, though Imhotep would no doubt argue that one. It's a certainty Sarek's grand plan to reverse the flood of the warp would definitely not have been implemented, and the true threat of the Tyranids to the Necrons would most likely not have been realised until it was too late. However, it is worth wondering if Sarek has reanimation protocols. Could Dante have flipped the switch, nuked himself and the Silent King, only for Sarek to simply come back in the end? What a slap in the face that would have been. However, assuming not, with this one action, this one selfless sacrifice, the Imperium and the galaxy could have been very different indeed. For better, and undoubtedly for worse. It's probably a very good thing Dante decided otherwise. But moving on, in sticking with the Blood Angels theme here, Gabriel Seth's calling for the Blood Angels to be disbanded. Considering the united front displayed by the Sons of Sanguinius during the devastation of Baal, it can be easy to forget that Dante called upon his successors for aid once before. Through years of hardship and various events, the Blood Angels had become very low on numbers, perilously low in fact, and they were upon the brink of extinction. Dante, knowing he had no hope of rebuilding the chapter alone, called out to his successor chapters, requesting a summoning upon the Blood Angels' homeworld. Once the Council of Chapter Masters was assembled, the truth was laid out, and Dante's request laid bare. He wanted a tithe of recruits from every successor chapter to rebuild the Blood Angels anew. Now this was a huge request at the best of times, for any Primarch bloodline. Even the most stable, such as the Ultramarines lineage, would have balked at such a demand. However, for the Blood Angels, historically the line most beset with flaws, and the one that struggles for numbers at all times, it was virtually incredulous. And despite my love for Dante, and his claims otherwise, it did seem to come across as a little like a demand, or at the very least an expectation, not like a true humble request. He certainly could have improved his way of asking, let me put it that way, relying instead on the prominence of the first founding title. And well, the immediate response wasn't particularly favourable, and the most vocal opposition was Chapter Master Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Tearers. As Chapter Master of a chapter he had single-handedly kept from extinction himself, not only did Seth outright reject Dante's request, but he candidly laid the blame at Dante's feet as well, declaring as Chapter Master, Dante was entirely responsible for the Blood Angels' plight, and he took it a step further still. Rather than aid Dante for his failure, putting their own chapters at risk, Seth claimed it should in fact be the Blood Angels who reinforced the successors, essentially disbanding the Blood Angels chapter entirely. If you want to read how this all goes down, it's in the novel Red Fury, and it's a great debate between the chapter masters. And Seth is entirely serious here. He means every word. There's an absolutely killer moment where Dante asks if Seth is challenging his leadership, and Seth in return, cool as a cucumber, is simply like, do I even need to? The meeting here speaks for itself. And Seth even later doubles down, going to Dante in private, telling him to step down as steward of Baal, to let another chapter take over. The future of the Blood Angels, of Dante, was truly in the balance here. If it wasn't for the devastation of Baal that later followed, this would be a much more famous moment, and it is no less defining. The matter would eventually be resolved due to the arrival of the enemy Chaos, bringing unity back to the Sons of the Blood. But if not for that, history could have been very, very different indeed. Next we have Pedro Cantor surviving the destruction of the Arx Tyrannus. Now, on first glance, you may not think this is a truly major moment, one with Imperium-wide repercussions. However, I propose it is. The events of Rindsworld are infamous by now. The Arx Tyrannus firing missiles against the assaulting Orc fleet, only to have one malfunction corkscrew its flight back into the fortress monastery, and in an unbelievable twist of ill fortune, hit the Crimson Fist's ammunition stores, causing a chain reaction that obliterated the fortress monastery entirely. The explosion took over 600 Crimson Fist Marines with it, including believed at the time Chapter Master Pedro Cantor himself. Again, as in so many of these defining moments, it was nothing more than sheer luck that Pedro had in fact survived. Conducting a routine patrol and inspection on the outer limits of the fortress monastery at the time, he was blown from the outer bastions in the blast, becoming one of only 16 survivors. Now, you can argue Cantor's survival wasn't integral to the chapter ultimately holding out against the Orcs. However, again, I've got to disagree. The morale boost alone at Cantor's survival was beyond measure, and beneath his leadership, barely 200 Marines continued to hold out against an entire Orc war. Using his strategic prowess, Cantor marshalled the defenders into small strike forces, and through the sheer stubbornness of Dawn, they simply refused to submit. 18 months later, when Imperial reinforcements finally arrived, Cantor and less than 100 Crimson Fists still held on. Now, the Crimson Fist's resistance is important for far more than simply Rindsworld, for if not that resistance, while Snagrod would have easily steamrolled far more of the Loki sector, and not to mention been ready when the eventual reinforcements arrived. The fate of the entire Loki sector could have been changed entirely, and with that the Imperium at large. And really, it's not even just while Snagrod itself, for Guilliman himself would later appoint Cantor as defender of the Loki sector entire as well, relying on him for the defense and reconquest of the sector. That's a hugely important role, and one that, if not for the sheer luck of timing at Cantor's patrol, would have been one he never lived to see. Indeed, it could have been a future the entire Loki sector never lived to see either. And last, but by no means least, we have Logan Grimnar's rejection of the Primaris. Now, when it comes to the Space Wolves, you've got fate-altering moments every other day of the week. However, it's this one in particular that has further-reaching implications for me. The Space Wolves' reaction to the return of Guilliman was far more apprehensive than their fellow Astartes, especially as far as Logan Grimnar himself was concerned. To him, Guilliman was the Legion Breaker, the man who had tried to force them into submission once before. Now he had returned, and the Wolves' independence would be questioned once again. And it certainly appeared to be the case early on, when emissaries of the Lord Commander arrived, bearing strange new marines and technology, for the Wolves to incorporate into their forces. It left Grimnar in a delicate situation: accept the gift of the Primaris, and risk the legacy of his past, the Lord Commander possibly attempting to turn the Sons of Russ into Ultramarines once again, or defy him, stay true to the legacy of his Primarch, and risk the destruction of his chapter. And it's worth remembering here the Primaris reception was still largely mixed across the Astartes entire at this point. Many Firstborn were highly resistant to these new arrivals. Word of a Space Wolf rejection, one of the most famous chapters out there, would have sent shockwaves across the galaxy. And even more so, if the chapter had been destroyed thereafter. It was a very tense time to say the least. The Primaris needed to be accepted. Guilliman needed them to be accepted. And swiftly, across the entire galaxy. Grimnar's rejection would have undoubtedly complicated that. And the Space Wolves' eventual fall would have had even more galaxy-wide repercussions. None more so than a cataclysmic morale blow of a first founding chapter gone. The few chapters that are renowned across the entire Imperium. So much resting on one man's decision. But as we know, Grimnar would ultimately relent. But it was close, and very nearly went the other way. But that's it. That's the 5. 5 moments that very nearly changed the Imperium and the galaxy forever. As always everyone, what do you think? Of the 5 moments I've named today, which of those do you feel was the most important? Which of those do you feel could have caused a blow the Imperium would never have recovered from? Would it have been the loss of Guilliman before he even reached Terra? Before word of his return had truly spread across the galaxy? Or do you feel it may be another of those moments? Do you feel that Cantor's survival is indeed a galaxy-renowned moment, as I personally feel? Or do you feel the Loki sector would have found another saviour? What of Gabriel Seth's calling for the Blood Angels to be disbanded? How would that have affected the future across the Great Rift? And indeed, what if Dante had sacrificed himself in taking out the Silent King? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.